A year had passed since the night that changed Marcus's life forever. The small suburban neighborhood where it all began now felt different, alive with a renewed sense of hope and determination. What started as one teenager's fight for justice had grown into a movement, inspiring people from all walks of life to demand accountability and reform. And at the center of it all stood Marcus, no longer just a high school student, but a symbol of resilience and courage. The legislative changes sparked by his case were celebrated as milestones in the ongoing battle for justice. Body cameras became mandatory for every officer in the state, ensuring transparency during interactions with the public. Stricter penalties for perjury under oath sent a clear message. Lying in court would no longer go unpunished. These victories weren't perfect solutions. They couldn't erase the pain Marcus had endured or undo the injustices faced by countless others, but they represented progress. Small steps toward a future where fairness might outweigh fear. Marcus continued to channel his experiences into advocacy work, attending rallies, speaking at conferences, and mentoring young people who looked up to him. He often shared the story of how something as simple as a phone recording had turned the tide in his favor. "You never know when your voice, or your camera, might change everything," he told audiences. His words resonated deeply, especially among teenagers who felt powerless against larger systems. Many started carrying their phones openly during traffic stops or encounters with authority figures, inspired by Marcus's example. His activism also brought unexpected opportunities. Colleges reached out, offering scholarships and invitations to speak on campus. Local leaders recognized his contributions, presenting him with awards for community service and leadership. Yet, despite the accolades, Marcus remained grounded. "I didn't do this for recognition," he often said. "I did it because I wanted to make sure no one else has to feel the way I did." One of the most impactful moments came when Marcus was invited to address a national conference on police reform. Standing on stage under bright lights, he looked out at a sea of faces. Activists, lawmakers, law enforcement officials, all gathered to discuss ways to rebuild trust between communities and those sworn to protect them. His voice trembled slightly as he began, but soon it grew steady and strong. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said, echoing advice once given to him by Sarah Miller. "But every action we take matters. Every truth we tell brings us closer to a world where justice isn't just a promise, it's a reality." As the audience erupted into applause, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of pride. This wasn't the life he'd imagined for himself, but it was one he embraced wholeheartedly. Through his journey, he'd learned the power of vulnerability, the importance of standing up even when you're scared, and the strength found in unity. Back home, Marcus balanced his newfound role as an advocate with the everyday challenges of being a teenager. He graduated high school with honors, cheered on by family, friends, and supporters who had followed his story. As he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, the crowd gave him a standing ovation, a testament not only to his academic achievements, but to the courage he'd shown in the face of adversity. Looking ahead, Marcus planned to study criminal justice in college, determined to continue fighting for systemic change from within. He envisioned a career working alongside policymakers, activists, and law enforcement agencies to create a fairer, more equitable system. Though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, he carried with him the lessons he learned. That truth has a way of finding its light, that justice is worth fighting for, and that even the smallest actions can spark monumental change. In the end, Marcus's story wasn't just about one boy's triumph over injustice. It was about the ripple effect of standing up for what's right. It was about proving that while the scars of trauma may linger, so does the human spirit's ability to heal, grow, and inspire others. As he stood on that graduation stage, surrounded by cheers and flashing cameras, Marcus reminded himself of the mantra that had carried him through the hardest days. Truth always finds its way to the light. And thanks to him, countless others now believed it too. Months after the trial, Marcus found himself standing in front of a room full of people at a community center. The walls were adorned with colorful posters promoting justice, equality, and reform. Rows of chairs were filled with neighbors, activists, and even local politicians who had come to hear him speak. It was a far cry from the quiet, unassuming teenager who had once dreaded being noticed. Yet here he was, stepping into a role he never imagined for himself. Marcus took a deep breath before beginning his speech. His voice trembled slightly at first, but as he spoke, it grew stronger. "I didn't ask for any of this," he admitted, looking out at the crowd. "I just wanted to go home that night. But sometimes life doesn't give us a choice. It forces us to stand up, even when we're scared." He paused, letting his words sink in. "What happened to me wasn't fair. But what kept me going was knowing I wasn't alone. My family believed in me. My lawyer fought for me. And now, all of you are here because you believe something has to change." The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the room. Marcus smiled faintly, though inside, he still carried the weight of everything he'd endured. Speaking publicly wasn't easy. Every time he recounted his story, it felt like reopening an old wound. But he reminded himself why he did it, so others wouldn't have to face the same fear and injustice he had. In the months since the trial, Officer Hayes had faced the consequences of his actions. Following the internal investigation, he was suspended without pay and eventually terminated from the police force. While some felt this wasn't enough, it marked a rare instance of accountability within law enforcement, a small but significant victory. Local news outlets covered the developments extensively, drawing attention not only to Marcus's case, but also to broader issues of misconduct and systemic bias in policing. For Marcus, healing came slowly. Therapy sessions helped him process the trauma of the arrest and the stress of the trial. Friends rallied around him, inviting him to basketball games and movie nights to help him feel like a normal teenager again. Still, there were moments when anxiety crept in. The sound of sirens late at night, or seeing a patrol car parked on his street could send his heart racing. He learned coping strategies, reminding himself that he had survived something unimaginable and emerged stronger because of it. As word of his advocacy work spread, Marcus became a symbol of resilience and hope. Schools invited him to talk to students about standing up for what's right, even when it feels impossible. Community organizations sought his input on initiatives aimed at improving police accountability and fostering trust between law enforcement and marginalized communities. At first, Marcus hesitated to embrace the label of activist, but over time, he realized the importance of using his voice to amplify those who couldn't speak for themselves. One particularly moving moment came during a youth empowerment rally. A young girl approached him after his speech, clutching a notebook filled with questions. "Do you think things will ever get better?" she asked shyly. Marcus knelt down to meet her eye level and nodded firmly. "Yes," he said, "but only if we keep fighting for it. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every step matters. And you can make a difference too." Her smile lit up the room, and Marcus felt a surge of purpose. This was why he kept pushing forward, despite the pain and exhaustion. Every person he inspired brought them one step closer to a world where no one would have to endure what he had. By the end of the year, Marcus's efforts began to bear fruit. Local lawmakers introduced legislation requiring body cameras for all officers, ensuring transparency in interactions with the public. Another bill proposed stricter penalties for perjury committed under oath, sending a clear message that lying in court wouldn't be tolerated. Though these changes weren't perfect solutions, they represented progress, a testament to the power of persistence and collective action. As Marcus reflected on how far he'd come, he thought about the video that had saved him. That tiny device had been more than just evidence. It had been a lifeline, pulling him out of despair and into a position to create real change. Life hadn't given him a choice in what happened that night, but he had chosen how to respond. And in doing so, he proved that even in the darkest moments, light can find its way through. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as the video footage faded from the screen, leaving behind a palpable sense of disbelief and outrage. The jury exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from shock to anger. Even the judge leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed as he processed what had just been revealed. Officer Hayes sat motionless, his face pale and his hands clenched tightly on the railing in front of him. For the first time, he looked less like an authoritative figure and more like a man caught in the act. Sarah wasted no time driving her point home. She turned to the prosecutor and asked pointedly, "Does the state still intend to pursue these charges?" The prosecutor hesitated, clearly unprepared for how quickly the case had unraveled. After a brief consultation with their team, they stood reluctantly and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, given the new evidence presented, we move to dismiss the charges against the defendant." A wave of relief washed over Marcus, but it was short-lived. While the immediate threat of conviction was gone, the damage done by Officer Hayes' actions lingered heavily in the air. Sarah wasn't about to let the matter rest there. She knew this wasn't just about Marcus. It was about accountability. Turning back to the judge, she requested that Officer Hayes be investigated for perjury and misconduct. "This is not an isolated incident," she argued passionately. "We owe it to the community to ensure something like this never happens again." The judge agreed, ordering an internal investigation into Officer Hayes' conduct. News of the dismissal spread quickly outside the courthouse, where reporters and community members had gathered. Cameras flashed as Marcus stepped out into the sunlight, shielding his eyes from the glare. His mother wrapped her arms around him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You're free," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Marcus hugged her back, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders, but also a lingering sadness. He had won his freedom, but at what cost? In the days that followed, the story exploded in local media. Headlines blared. "Teenager exonerated after police officer caught lying under oath." The public outcry was swift and fierce. Protesters took to the streets, holding signs demanding justice and reform. Social media buzzed with calls for transparency and accountability within law enforcement. What started as one teenager's fight for truth had ignited a broader conversation about systemic issues plaguing communities across the country. Meanwhile, Officer Hayes faced mounting pressure. Internal investigators dug into his past, uncovering a troubling pattern of complaints filed against him by other citizens who claimed similar experiences of false accusations and excessive force. Though none of those cases had led to consequences before, the spotlight now shone brightly on his record. Fellow officers distanced themselves from him, fearing association with someone whose credibility had been shattered in open court. For Marcus, life began to return to some semblance of normalcy, though scars remained. Friends and classmates reached out, offering support and admiration for his courage. Teachers praised him for standing up against injustice, while strangers sent messages of encouragement through social media. Yet despite the outpouring of kindness, Marcus struggled to shake off the anxiety that came with being thrust into the public eye. Every knock at the door or unfamiliar face made him uneasy, a reminder of the night everything changed. Still, amid the challenges, Marcus found moments of hope. Community leaders invited him to speak at rallies and town hall meetings, giving him a platform to share his experience. At first, he hesitated. He didn't see himself as a spokesperson or activist. But when he saw how his words resonated with others who had faced similar injustices, he realized the power of speaking out. Each story shared added fuel to the growing movement for change. As weeks turned into months, Marcus reflected on how far he'd come. The arrest that once threatened to ruin his life had instead become a catalyst for something greater. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't fair. But sometimes, the hardest battles yield the most meaningful victories. Officer Hayes may have thought he could silence Marcus with lies, but he hadn't counted on one thing. The truth always finds a way to shine through. And this time, it did so with the whole world watching. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the bailiff set up the projector. All eyes were glued to the screen at the front of the room, anticipation hanging thick in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Sarah stood confidently beside the table, her hands resting lightly on the edge as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, We'd like to present video evidence that directly contradicts the testimony provided by Officer Hayes. This footage was recorded unintentionally by my client's phone during the incident in question. The judge nodded, his expression neutral but attentive. "Proceed," he said simply. With that, the lights dimmed slightly, and the video began to play. The grainy but clear image showed Marcus pulling over to the side of the road, his car coming to a smooth stop. For a moment, nothing happened, just the faint hum of crickets in the background. Then Officer Hayes appeared in the frame, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as he approached the driver's side window. The audio crackled to life, capturing every word exchanged between Marcus and the officer. Marcus's voice was calm and respectful as he answered questions about his license and registration. He moved slowly, deliberately, ensuring there was no reason for suspicion or alarm. But then came the shift, the subtle change in tone from Officer Hayes. His words grew sharper, more accusatory, as he claimed Marcus had been speeding and weaving between lanes. As the video continued, it became painfully obvious that Marcus wasn't resisting or acting aggressively. When Officer Hayes ordered him out of the car, Marcus complied immediately, keeping his hands visible and doing exactly as instructed. There was no pushing, no struggle, just a teenager trying to understand why this routine stop had escalated so quickly. The jury watched intently, their faces shifting from skepticism to disbelief as the truth unfolded before them. Officer Hayes sat rigidly in his seat, his jaw clenched tightly. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by an unmistakable tension. He stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the screen, but there was no escaping what everyone else could see. Every accusation he'd made under oath was falling apart, exposed as lies by the very footage he hadn't known existed. When the video ended, the courtroom remained silent for several long seconds. It was as if no one wanted to be the first to break the spell. Finally, Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady and commanding. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've just witnessed the truth. My client did not resist arrest. He did not assault Officer Hayes. Everything you've seen aligns with Marcus's account and completely refutes the officer's testimony." She turned to face Officer Hayes, her gaze piercing. "Let me ask you again, Officer Hayes. Does this video confirm your version of events, or does it prove beyond any doubt that you lied under oath?" The room felt electric, charged with the weight of her question. Officer Hayes shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, he looked down at his lap, defeated. Sarah didn't let up. She walked slowly back toward the jury, making eye contact with each member as she spoke. "This isn't just about one night or one young man. It's about accountability for all of us. When someone in a position of authority abuses their power and lies under oath, it undermines the trust we place in our justice system. We can't allow that to stand." By the time she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted entirely. The jury members whispered quietly among themselves, visibly shaken by what they'd seen. Even the judge seemed affected, jotting notes furiously as he reviewed the implications of the evidence. For Marcus, sitting there watching the scene unfold, it felt surreal. Just days ago, he'd been convinced no one would believe him. Now, the truth was undeniable, and it was finally being heard. As Sarah returned to her seat and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. They weren't done yet, but for the first time in weeks, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for the possibility that justice might actually prevail. The courtroom was tense, buzzing with an energy that made it hard to breathe. Rows of wooden benches creaked as spectators shifted in their seats, whispering among themselves. Marcus sat stiffly beside Sarah, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. Across the aisle, Officer Hayes sat confidently, his posture relaxed, as if he didn't have a care in the world. The contrast between the two couldn't have been starker. When the judge called the court to order, The room fell silent. The prosecution began its case by calling Officer Hayes to the stand. As he stood and walked to the witness box, his uniform crisp and polished, Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Officer Hayes raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and took his seat. His expression was calm, almost smug, as if he already knew how this would end. The prosecutor started with simple questions. "Can you describe what happened on the night of the incident?" Officer Hayes nodded and launched into his story with practiced ease. He painted a vivid picture of Marcus as aggressive and uncooperative, claiming that Marcus had tried to resist arrest and even pushed him during the struggle. His voice carried authority, each word dripping with conviction. To someone unfamiliar with the truth, it sounded convincing, even damning. As Officer Hayes spoke, Marcus clenched his fists under the table, fighting the urge to shout, "That's not true." But Sarah had warned him about keeping his emotions in check. She leaned over slightly and whispered, "Stay calm. This is exactly what we expected." Her words helped steady him, but only just barely. The prosecutor continued, asking leading questions designed to reinforce Officer Hayes' version of events. "And did you feel threatened by the defendant's behavior?" Hayes nodded solemnly. "Absolutely. I feared for my safety and acted accordingly." The jury scribbled notes, their faces unreadable masks. Some glanced at Marcus briefly before looking away, their expressions neutral but unreadable. Finally, it was Sarah's turn to cross-examine Officer Hayes. She rose from her chair slowly, her movements deliberate and measured. Her presence commanded attention without being overly dramatic. As she approached the witness stand, Marcus noticed a subtle change in Officer Hayes' demeanor. For the first time, there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Officer Hayes," Sarah began, her tone polite but firm, "you stated that my client resisted arrest and attempted to push you. Is that correct?" Hayes nodded confidently. "Yes, Mom." Sarah paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "Would it surprise you to learn that your entire interaction with my client was recorded?" The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Officer Hayes blinked, caught off guard. For a split second, his composure wavered, but he quickly recovered. "Recorded? By whom?" "By my client's phone," Sarah replied smoothly, her voice unwavering. "A device that was in his pocket during the encounter. A fact you were unaware of at the time, correct?" Hayes hesitated, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. I wouldn't know anything about that." Sarah allowed another beat of silence before pressing further. "Let me ask you this. If we were to play that recording here in court today, would it confirm your account of what happened or contradict it?" The question hung heavy in the air, the tension palpable. Officer Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence beginning to crack. He glanced toward the prosecutor, who avoided eye contact, clearly unprepared for this line of questioning. After a long pause, Hayes muttered, "I can't say for certain." Sarah smiled faintly, knowing she planted a seed of doubt. "Thank you, Officer Hayes. No further questions." As Sarah returned to her seat, Marcus exhaled deeply, realizing for the first time that they might actually have a chance. The courtroom felt different now, charged with anticipation, as if everyone sensed that the tide was about to turn. And when Sarah signaled to the bailiff to bring up the video footage, Marcus felt a surge of hope. The truth was about to come out, whether Officer Hayes liked it or not. As the trial date loomed closer, Marcus and Sarah sat together in a small, dimly lit room at the courthouse. Papers were scattered across the table. Police reports, witness statements, and legal documents that all seemed to paint Marcus as guilty. But Sarah wasn't discouraged. She had spent countless hours poring over every detail of the case, searching for anything that could help prove Marcus's innocence. And then there was the phone. Sarah carefully connected Marcus's phone to her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she prepared to review the footage. Marcus held his breath, unsure of what they might find. The video began playing, and almost instantly, both of them froze. There it was, clear as day, the truth unfolding right before their eyes. From the moment Officer Hayes approached the car to the heated exchange that followed, everything Marcus had described was captured on camera. His calm demeanor, his compliance with instructions, and most importantly, the complete absence of any aggression on his part. Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. "This is it," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "This changes everything." Marcus nodded silently, relief washing over him like a wave. For weeks, he had carried the weight of doubt and fear, wondering if anyone would ever believe him. Now, he finally had proof, not just for himself, but for everyone who doubted his story. But having the video wasn't enough. Sarah knew they needed to build a strong strategy around it. They couldn't simply walk into court and expect the footage to speak for itself. People tend to trust authority figures, especially police officers, and overturning that trust wouldn't be easy. Sarah explained this to Marcus gently, reminding him that while the video was powerful evidence, they still had to present it in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Over the next few days, Sarah worked tirelessly to prepare their defense. She studied the video frame by frame, noting key moments where Marcus's actions directly contradicted Officer Hayes' claims. She also researched Officer Hayes' background, discovering a pattern of complaints filed against him by other citizens who claimed similar treatment during traffic stops. While none of those cases had resulted in disciplinary action, they provided context that could support Marcus's narrative in court. Meanwhile, Marcus tried to stay focused and hopeful, though the pressure was immense. Every time he thought about stepping into the courtroom, his stomach churned. He imagined facing Officer Hayes again, sitting just a few feet away while the man recounted lies under oath. It felt surreal, almost like something out of a movie. But this wasn't fiction. It was real life, and the outcome would determine Marcus's future. Sarah did her best to keep Marcus grounded, reminding him of the importance of staying composed no matter what happened in court. "You're not just fighting for yourself," she told him one evening as they reviewed notes. "You're standing up for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly because of someone else's dishonesty. This isn't just your story, it's bigger than you." The night before the trial, Marcus lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with thoughts of what might happen the next day. What if the judge didn't believe them? What if the jury sided with Officer Hayes despite the video? These questions swirled endlessly until exhaustion finally took over, pulling him into a restless sleep. Little did Marcus know, the courtroom battle ahead would test not only his patience, but also his faith in justice itself. Yet deep down, he clung to one unshakable belief. The truth was on his side. And sometimes, even when the odds seem stacked against you, the truth has a way of finding its voice. The quiet neighborhood where Marcus lived was suddenly buzzing with whispers and worried conversations. News of his arrest spread quickly, like ripples in a pond after a stone is thrown. His family was devastated. When Marcus's mother, Lisa, received the call from the police station late that night, her heart sank. She rushed to the station, her mind racing with questions. Why would they arrest my son? What could he possibly have done? At the station, she found Marcus sitting in a cold, sterile holding cell. His usually bright eyes were clouded with fear and confusion. Seeing her son like this broke Lisa's heart. "Marcus, what happened?" she asked, gripping the bars separating them. Marcus tried to explain, but his voice trembled as he recounted the events of the evening. He told her about the stop, the accusations, and how everything spiraled out of control so quickly. Lisa listened intently, her anger growing, not at Marcus, but at the injustice of it all. The next morning, Lisa called their family friend, Sarah Miller, a public defender known for her dedication to fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Sarah arrived at the house later that day, ready to hear Marcus's side of the story. As Marcus described the incident in detail, Sarah noticed something unusual. A faint glimmer of hope in his voice when he mentioned his phone. "I had it in my pocket, Marcus said hesitantly. It might have recorded something. Sarah immediately understood the potential significance of this detail. If Marcus's phone had captured footage of the encounter, it could be the evidence needed to prove his innocence. But first, they had to act fast. The charges against Marcus were serious: assaulting an officer and resisting arrest. And if convicted, he could face jail time or probation, not to mention a permanent mark on his record. For a teenager with dreams of attending college and building a future, the stakes couldn't have been higher. As word of Marcus's arrest spread, the community began to take sides. Some people believed the police officer's version of events without question, assuming Marcus must have done something wrong to provoke such a reaction. Others knew Marcus well. He was a polite, hard-working kid who volunteered at the local library and helped neighbors carry groceries. They found it hard to believe he'd ever act aggressively toward anyone, let alone a police officer. Meanwhile, Marcus struggled to come to terms with what had happened. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind, wondering if there was anything he could have done differently. Should he have spoken up more? Should he have stayed completely silent? The uncertainty gnawed at him, making it hard to sleep or focus on anything else. His parents did their best to reassure him, reminding him that the truth would eventually come out. But deep down, Marcus wasn't sure anyone would believe him, especially since Officer Hayes was the one telling the official story. Days turned into weeks as preparations for the trial began. Sarah worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, filing motions, and strategizing how to present Marcus's case in court. She reminded Marcus that staying strong and keeping faith in the process was crucial. Still, the weight of the situation bore down heavily on him. Every knock at the door made him flinch, fearing it might be law enforcement coming back. Every glance from strangers felt like judgment. But amidst the fear and frustration, there was one thing Marcus clung to: the possibility that his phone held the key to clearing his name. He didn't know yet what the video showed, or even if it existed, but it gave him a sliver of hope during a dark and uncertain time. Little did he realize just how powerful that small device would become, not only for his own life, but for the larger issues it would bring to light. The evening air was cool and calm, with only the faint hum of crickets breaking the silence in the quiet suburban neighborhood. 17-year-old Marcus Johnson had just left his friend's house after working on a school project. He was driving home, his mind focused on finishing up some last-minute homework before bed. What started as an ordinary night quickly turned into something Marcus would never forget. As Marcus approached a stop sign, he noticed flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the rearview mirror. His heart skipped a beat, not because he was doing anything wrong, but because being pulled over always made him nervous. He pulled over to the side of the road, rolled down his window, and waited patiently for the officer to approach. Officer Daniel Hayes walked up to the car, his flashlight shining directly into Marcus's face. "License and registration," he said sharply, without offering so much as a greeting. Marcus nodded politely and reached for his documents, making sure to keep his movements slow and deliberate so as not to alarm the officer. But even though Marcus followed every instruction, something about the situation felt off. Officer Hayes seemed unusually tense. As Marcus handed over his license and registration, the officer scanned them briefly before asking, "What were you doing at this time of night?" Marcus explained that he'd been studying at a friend's house and was heading home. It was a simple, honest answer, but it didn't seem to satisfy Officer Hayes. Without warning, the tone shifted. The officer suddenly accused Marcus of speeding and weaving between lanes, claims Marcus knew weren't true. He tried to explain himself calmly, insisting that he hadn't broken any traffic laws. But instead of listening, Officer Hayes grew more agitated. Before Marcus could process what was happening, the officer ordered him to step out of the vehicle. Confused and scared, Marcus complied. He kept his hands visible, just like they teach in school safety programs, and did his best to stay calm. Yet things escalated fast. Officer Hayes claimed Marcus resisted arrest, and even went so far as to say Marcus attempted to push him away during the encounter. In reality, Marcus hadn't laid a finger on the officer. He simply stood there, bewildered and frightened, trying to figure out why this was spiraling out of control. What neither Marcus nor Officer Hayes realized at the time was that Marcus's phone, which he'd been using earlier while parked outside his friend's house, was still recording in his pocket. Every word spoken, every command given, and every action taken was being captured on video. This tiny detail would later become the key to unraveling the truth and exposing a lie that could have destroyed Marcus's life forever. For now, however, Marcus found himself handcuffed and placed in the back of a police cruiser, his mind racing with questions. How had such a routine night turned into this? Would anyone believe him when he said he hadn't done anything wrong? And most importantly, how was he going to prove his innocence when it felt like the entire world was against him? Little did he know, the answers lay hidden in the very device, sitting unnoticed in his pocket.